Dwayne brought me to Pine Rest Nursing Home on Thursday, March 19th. I remember it exactly because the TV in the lobby was tuned to the weather forecast, and the newscaster was blabbing something about the vernal equinox with a glued on smile. I wondered what the hell the equinox was when the sky was cloudy and it had frozen again last night. We pulled up to the three-story brick building in his pickup truck, an old Ford that he never has money for repairs, but always has money for a new sound system. Dwayne was carrying my suitcase and talking so briskly that it was immediately obvious. Nervous. Whenever my son gets nervous, he starts gibbering like he's trying to talk the other person to death. You'll see, Mom, it's not what you think. It's a very modern place, like a hotel, and the staff are friendly. And the dining room. Shelby stopped by last week and said she was jealous. What's there to be jealous of? I asked, struggling to get out of the truck and leaning on my cane. My hip was still sore from the fall. The prospect of rotting alive in the company of similar wrecks? Dwayne pretended not to hear. He always pretended not to hear inconvenient things. It's been with him since childhood. If a problem is difficult enough, pretend it doesn't exist, and maybe it will solve itself. This approach led to his divorce from his first wife, his debts, and the fact that at 48 he still works as a simple mechanic in a car service center, even though he could have started his own business long ago. Can I help you? He asked, looking over my head. I can handle it, I said. It wasn't a wreck yet. The lobby of the nursing home was decorated in beige and blue, colors that some clever marketing guy had apparently decided were soothing. Watercolor landscapes hung on the walls, bloodless and fresh, like oatmeal on water. The front desk resembled a hospital's, the same safety glass, the same unnatural smile on the receptionist's face. Mr. and Mrs. Craig? The woman behind the counter smiled. The name tag read, Barbara Hatcher, receptionist. Mr. Craig and his mother, I corrected her. Of course. Hatcher nodded, still smiling. We have everything ready for your arrival, Mrs. Craig. We're so happy to welcome you to Pine Rest. Temporarily, Dwayne put in, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. Mom's staying here temporarily while we renovate. Hatcher nodded again, but something in her gaze told me she'd heard the song many times before. Temporary is a word that hangs in the air like the smell of cheap freshener, unconvincing and phony. Of course, Mr. Craig, many of our guests start with short stays. Dwayne started filling out paperwork, and I looked around. There were several old men sitting in plastic chairs in the lobby. One was dozing with his head tilted back. Another was leafing through a shabby magazine. A gray-haired woman in a purple sweater was talking to herself, gesturing as if she had an invisible interlocutor in front of her. I caught her eye, and she looked away. That's it. Dwayne finished with the paperwork and walked over to me. Barbara will show you to your room now. I'll help you with your things. How generous of you, I said. We went up to the second floor. The elevator was slow and smelled like an old washcloth. The corridor stretched like a gut with identical doors on either side, with handrails along the walls, with dim lamps that gave off a light that looked like diluted milk. Here's your room, 215, Hatcher announced, stopping at the door and unlocking it with a key card. You will have a roommate, Mrs. Billings, a very pleasant lady. A roommate? Dwayne frowned. We were talking about a single room. I'm afraid all the single rooms are taken right now, Hatcher said. But as soon as one becomes available, you can move in. Usually the wait is 3 or 4 weeks. But I won't be here more than 2, I said, turning to my son. Isn't that right, Dwayne? He hesitated. Sure, Mom, but you realize that renovations sometimes take a while. 2 weeks tops, I said firmly. Then I'm coming home, with or without the repairs. The room was divided in half by a thin partition. Each half had its own bed, nightstand, closet, and chair. My half was occupied by a woman about 65 years younger than me by about 8 years, but looking much older. She looked up from her book and gave us a scrutinizing glance. "Good afternoon," she said, setting the book aside. "I'm Nora Billings." "Bertha Craig," I answered. "And this is my son Dwayne. He brought me here temporarily while my house was being remodeled." Nora smiled as if she'd heard a familiar joke. "Of course he did. I'm here temporarily too, while my nephew builds an addition to his house where I'll live." Hatcher pressed her lips together. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted," she said, and turning to Dwayne added, "You'll need to come up to me to sign some more papers." As she walked out, Dwayne set my suitcase by the bed and looked around nervously. "There, that wasn't so bad, was it?" "Delicious," I replied. "Especially the smell. What is that? Chlorine and urine?" "Mom," he lowered his voice, "give this place a chance. You know I can't leave you alone after what happened. And Shelby and I just don't have the space. You have a 4-bedroom house. The kids," he started it, "might be a little cramped, but let's not talk about that. You said 2 weeks. I'll cling to those words like a drowning man to a straw." He turned his gaze to Nora, who was listening to our conversation. "I gotta go, Mom. There's more paperwork and Shelby's waiting. I'll call tomorrow to see how you're settling in." "Sure," I said. "Run along. I'm sure you've got better things to do." He looked like he wanted to add something, but then he just nodded and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I sank heavily onto the bed. The mattress was too soft, the kind that you couldn't get up without help. "How long have you been here?" I asked Nora, starting to unpack my suitcase. "4 months," she said. The nephew had taken longer to build than he'd expected. "And before that, you lived alone?" "Yes, after my husband died." "Your husband died too?" 10 years ago, lung cancer, smoked all his life." Nora nodded with understanding. "Mine was a heart attack, right at dinner, just laughing at something stupid on TV, and then 1 minute later, he was gone." I pulled a framed photograph out of my suitcase, the only one I'd brought with me. It was of Henry and me on our 30th anniversary. Both of us not old anymore, but happy. I put it on the nightstand. "They make a handsome couple," Nora said. "We used to be," I replied. The dinner bell rang for dinner. Nora showed me the way to the dining room, a large room on the first floor with a dozen round tables. The walls were the same hospital color as the hallways. The smell of food, overcooked vegetables and cheap meat, hung in the air like a cloud. "Everyone sits wherever they want, but people usually take the same seats," Nora explained. "Come on, I'll introduce you to our table." At the table by the window sat 3 other women, all gray-haired, all with the same absent expression on their faces that seemed to be the standard uniform of the place. "This is Bertha. She's new," Nora introduced me. "And this is Marjorie, Alice, and Dorothy." The women nodded, but without much interest. Only Alice, the largest of them, with massive silver earrings, asked, "How long are you staying with us?" "2 weeks," I answered. "No more than that." Alice grinned and looked at the others. "Of course, dear. We're all here for 2 weeks." The food was exactly as I'd expected, tasteless and boiled down to baby food. Stewed vegetables, mashed potatoes, and something that was probably once a chicken breast. I picked at my plate, feeling my appetite leaving me. "You'll get used to it," Dorothy said, noticing my grimace. "There's custard pie on Tuesdays. It's the only thing worth living for." After dinner, there was a social activity, board games in the common room. I declined and went back to the room. The silence and emptiness of my own half of the room suddenly seemed unbearable. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dwayne's number. It took a long time to ring, and finally it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep. I just wanted to let you know I'm settled in. The food here is terrible, and the mattress is like a swamp. But I'll get by. 2 weeks isn't that long. I disconnected and put my phone on the nightstand. It was dark outside the window, and the glass reflected a half-empty room with a dull hospital lamp and a strange old woman on the bed. I didn't immediately realize it was me. Nora returned an hour later, bringing with her the smell of lavender and medicine. I usually read before I go to bed, she said, settling into a chair with a book. Would the light bother you? No, I answered. I haven't slept at night in about 10 years. The night at Pine Rest was longer than I expected. There were sounds through the walls, someone's coughing, the creaking of floorboards, the distant voices of nurses. The building seemed to have a life of its own, sighing and crackling. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to Nora's quiet breathing behind the partition. In the morning over breakfast, tasteless oatmeal and liquid coffee, I saw how the world worked. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, helping those who couldn't eat on their own, dispensing medication, marking something on clipboards. The residents of Pine Rest seemed like ghosts, translucent, quiet, resigned. I swore to myself that I would not be like that. After breakfast, I tried to call Dwayne again. He didn't answer, so I left another message, then another in the afternoon, and another in the evening. On the second day, I learned the names of all the morning shift nurses, and that old Harold in room 302 had once been the mayor of Cody, and now couldn't even remember his own name. I learned that dinner was served at 5 o'clock sharp, and the lights in the common areas were turned off at 7, as if we were all kids at summer camp. A week went by and my phone was silent. I called Dwayne 3 times a day, morning, lunch, and evening before bed as a prayer, as a ritual. Sometimes it would ring until it went straight to voicemail. Sometimes it would go straight to voicemail. On the fifth day, I stopped leaving messages. I just listened to his voice on the tape. Hello, you've reached Dwayne Craig. Leave a message after the beep and hit disconnect. On Sunday, I tried Shelby. Her phone was disconnected. I even dialed Mason's number, but my grandson wouldn't pick up. I tried Nora's cell phone, same result. It was as if my whole family had vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind only the echo of ringing tones in the void. Don't take it personally, Nora said when I hung up the phone again, frustrated. It's always like that in the first few weeks. We were sitting in the common room, a large room with worn carpet and armchairs arranged around a TV. There was some game playing on the screen that no one was watching. Most of the occupants were dozing with their chins on their chests or staring blankly into space. Is it always like this? I asked. So I wasn't the first person my son had turned in here under the pretense of repair? Nora pressed her lips together. The stories are different, but the result is the same. My niece said she was building an addition to her house for me. It's been 7 months. The addition is still almost done. George in room 317 thought he had been brought in for rehab after a stroke. His daughter sold his house a month after she'd finalized the paperwork. She spoke without bitterness, just stating the facts, like an announcer reading the news of a distant disaster. There was something frightening in her calmness. And no one is doing anything? I asked. What's there to do? All the papers are signed by law. And where can we go? Houses are sold. Things are given away. Some people try to fight for the first time, but then they get over it. We were quiet. Outside the window, a fine rain was falling, leaving crooked tracks on the glass. Somewhere in the hallway, a medication cart was jingling. I'm not going to accept it, I said finally. Nora looked at me with interest. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but if Dwayne thinks I'm just going to disappear from his life, he's sorely mistaken. That night, I dreamed of our old house on Pine Street, the same house I'd lived in for almost 40 years, where I'd raised Dwayne, where I'd buried my husband. In the dream, the house was empty and dark, all the things gone and the walls moldy. I wandered around the rooms, calling for someone, but no one answered. I woke up in a cold sweat, with my heart pounding, and the thought, they're selling my house. Monday morning started with pills. The nurse, Rita, a full-bodied woman with perpetually disheveled hair, handed out the medication from plastic cups. Mrs. Craig, your pills. She handed me a cup with 2 white pills in it. What are these? I asked. Blood pressure and vitamins, Rita replied with a professional smile. Dr. Shears prescribed them. Dr. Shears who? I've never met him. He comes in on Tuesdays. You can talk to him tomorrow. I took the cup, but I didn't swallow the pills. As soon as Rita turned away, I hid them in a napkin. Something told me I couldn't just trust everything they gave me in this place. After breakfast, I tried calling Dwayne again. The phone was disconnected. I found the number of the auto service center where he worked in my address book and called there. Peterson's Auto Service, a man's voice answered. Hi, I'm looking for Dwayne Craig. Who's asking for him? His mother. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dwayne's not working today, the voice said finally. When will he be? I can't tell you. He's taking some time off this week. Time off? I asked him again. Why? I couldn't say, ma'am. Why don't you call him at home? I'm calling. He's not picking up. Pause again. I'm sorry, ma'am. All I can tell you is that he's requested time off for family reasons. I thanked him and hung up. Family emergency. I wondered what kind of family emergency a man who had just turned his own mother into a nursing home might have. Did something happen? Nora asked, noticing the look on my face. Dwayne took time off work, I answered. It was a family emergency. Nora nodded, as if that confirmed her thoughts. Do you know what usually happens after a new tenant arrives? She asked, lowering her voice. The family dismantles the house. They take out the furniture, sort through the stuff, what to sell, what to throw away, what to keep. My niece had a garage sale the week after I got here. She sold my set that I inherited from my mother. I felt the blood rush to my face. Dwayne wouldn't dare, I said. Every single thing in this house is a memory of his father. Memory is a luxury few people can afford. Nora shrugged, especially when money is involved. There was a craft fair at Pine Rest that day, and the residents of the house were displaying their work in the lobby. Knitted scarves, homemade cards, embroidery, all the things that occupied the hands and minds of people who had been robbed of their past and left with no future. I wandered between the tables, looking at other people's work, until I stopped at a table with newspapers. Are you interested in the local news? Asked a thin man with thick glasses sitting at the table. I'm Harold Tanner, a volunteer. I bring you the latest press every Monday. Not really, I replied, looking at the stack of newspapers. On top was the latest issue of the Cody Chronicle with a picture of some city event on the front page. Read it. Harold pushed the paper toward me. It's free. At our age, you have to stay informed, or the world passes you by. I took the paper, more out of politeness, but as I started leafing through, a small column on page 4 caught my attention. Rising number of lonely seniors in Park County raises concern. The article was short, just a few paragraphs about how the number of abandoned elderly people is growing, how nursing homes are filling up, how social services can't handle the flood of referrals. At the end, the author was listed as Frank Olson. Who is this Olson? I asked, showing the article to Harold. Oh, Frank, he cheered. He's a good guy. Been working at the Cody Chronicle for 10 years. Writes mostly social issues. His mother was in a nursing home, too, so he brings it up a lot. Do you have his contacts? Harold looked at me with interest. Why do you want to know? I want to share my story, I answered bluntly. I thought he might be interested to know how my son had brought me here on the pretext of repairing the house, and now he wasn't answering his phone. Harold shook his head. There are thousands of stories like that, Mrs. Craig. Bertha Craig. There are thousands of stories like that, Mrs. Craig. How is yours different? I've been thinking. Really, how? Was it that I wasn't going to accept it? I don't know, I answered honestly. But if no one talks about it out loud, nothing will change. Harold stared at me for a few seconds, then sighed and pulled a shabby business card holder out of his pocket. Here, he handed me the card. The phone number of the editorial office and his personal email. Tell him it's from me. I took the card and tucked it into my robe pocket. Thank you. Don't thank me. He smiled crookedly. It probably won't work, but it's worth a try. That evening, I sat in my room, looking at the card. Frank Olson, journalist, phone number and email address. A chance to make a difference, or at least to be heard. Are you really going to contact him? Nora asked, watching me from her chair. Why wouldn't I? It could have consequences for you and for your family. What family? I grinned bitterly. The one that left me here and won't answer the phone? Nora sighed. You're still hoping Dwayne will come back for you. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. But putting him out there, making him a traitor in the eyes of the whole town, that's not gonna happen. I looked at the picture on the nightstand, Henry and I, happy and full of plans for the future. What would he say now? What would he do if he found out his son had left his mother in a nursing home? I'm not hopeful anymore, I answered. I just want there to be justice. Justice, Nora repeated. It's a beautiful word. But what does it mean at our age? Is it fair that we become a burden to our own children? Is it fair that our bodies betray us and our minds slip away? Is it fair that we are forced to live out our lives in places like this? It's not fair that we're lied to, I said firmly. It's not fair that we're thrown away like a waste of space instead of being told the truth to our faces. Nora looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You're right. Do what you have to do. I'll back you up. The next morning, I called the Cody Chronicle. A woman who identified herself as a secretary answered the phone. I asked to be connected to Frank Olson and gave Harold's name as a reference. Just a moment, she said, and the line filled with soft music. After a few seconds, a man's voice came through the receiver. Frank Olson here. My name is Bertha Craig, I began. I'm calling from the Pine Rest Nursing Home. Harold Tanner gave me your number. I read your article about lonely seniors and would like to tell my story. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Olson asked, What's the story, Mrs. Craig? My son brought me to a nursing home ostensibly while my house was being renovated. Said it was for a couple weeks. It's been a week, and he stopped answering his cell phone. I think he's getting rid of me, and I'm not the only one in that position. Olson seemed interested. Would you be willing to do an interview with your name and picture? Yes, I answered without hesitation. And I have a picture of my son. I want the whole town to know what he did. I understand how you feel, Mrs. Craig, but we have to be careful about making accusations. Maybe your son has an explanation. If he does, let him tell me instead of hiding, I interrupted. All I want is the truth. Olson was silent for a moment, then said, Okay, I can come tomorrow around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that okay? Yes, I answered. I'll be waiting. As I hung up the phone, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a week, I'd done something, regained some control over the situation. No matter what happened next, at least I wasn't sitting around. What's up? Nora asked when I came back into the room. He's coming tomorrow, I answered. At 2 o'clock. What are you going to say? The truth? I sat down on the bed, feeling suddenly tired. The whole truth about how old people are treated in this town. Nora nodded. I think I'll talk to him too. Tell him about my niece and the garage sale, about how she promised to build an addition that's never gonna happen. That would be great. I smiled weakly. The more voices, the better. That night, I tried to call Dwayne again. This time, the phone didn't even buzz. The mechanical voice said the caller was temporarily unavailable. I hung up and looked at the picture of my son I'd pulled out of my scrapbook. Dwayne at last year's barbecue, smiling, with a bottle of beer in his hand, wearing his favorite plaid shirt. A picture that would end up in the paper tomorrow next to the story about him leaving his mother. You chose this path yourself, I told the picture. I didn't. At night, I dreamed of our house again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was crowded with strangers, going through my things, trying on my clothes, looking at my pictures. And I was standing in the middle of the living room, screaming, but no one saw or heard me. I woke up with a pounding heart and lay in the dark for a long time, listening to Nora's quiet breathing and the distant footsteps of the night shift in the hallway. In the morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with the journalist, picked out my best dress, styled my hair, even applied some lipstick. I wanted to look dignified when I told my story. Are you sure? Nora asked one last time as I prepared to go out into the lobby where the meeting was scheduled. It wasn't too late to cancel. I shook my head. I'd never been so sure. There was already a man in his 40s in jeans and a sweater waiting for me in the lobby, not at all like a journalist from the old movies. No notebook, just a small voice recorder and a smartphone. Mrs. Craig? He held out his hand. Frank Olson, Cody Chronicle. Thank you for seeing me. You're 10 minutes late, I remarked, shaking his hand. Olson smiled. I apologize. Road work on Main Street. We sat in the corner of the lobby, where there were 2 chairs and a low table, secluded enough to talk, but in plain sight so the administration wouldn't be bothered. So, Olson switched on the recorder. Tell me your story, Mrs. Craig. And I did, about how Dwayne brought me here, promising me it would be temporary, how he stopped answering his cell phone, how I found out he'd taken time off work, about my suspicions about the house. I talked, and the words flowed out like a dam bursting. Olson listened attentively, sometimes asking clarifying questions, making notes on his phone. When I finished, he turned off the recorder and asked, Do you have a picture of your son? I pulled out the picture from the barbecue and handed it to him. Here, Dwayne Craig, 48 years old, works as a mechanic at Peterson's Auto Service. Olson looked at the photograph. Are you sure you want this picture published? It would make the story very personal. That's the point, I replied. I want people to see his face, the face of a man who abandoned his mother. The reporter went over a few more details, wrote down names and dates, then turned off the recorder. The story will be in Friday's issue, he said. If you want to add anything, call me. He left his card and left, and I sat in the lobby, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Something had begun to move, something that could no longer be stopped. By Friday, the whole of Pine Rest knew about my interview. News spreads faster in places like this than the smell of burnt porridge in the dining room. Nora was supportive, though I could see the worry in her eyes. The other residents reacted differently. Some approved of my determination. Some thought I was making a mistake. Most just watched with lukewarm interest. Friday morning, Harold brought me the latest issue of the Cody Chronicle. The article took up almost the entire third page with a big headline, Abandoned Parents, a New Epidemic in Cody, and a picture of Dwayne right below it. Next to it was a picture of me. Olson had taken it during the interview. I looked older than I realized I was, with deep wrinkles around my mouth, shadows under my eyes, but a straight, defiant look. Olson conveyed my story well, quoting directly from our conversation. But he went further. He contacted the administration of Pine Rest and found that there are many such stories. Almost 60% of the residents ended up here with the promise that it was temporary and then were actually abandoned by their relatives. "How's it going?" Nora asked, looking over my shoulder. "That's exactly what I said," I replied. "Now we'll see what happens next." We didn't have to wait long. By lunchtime, Pine Rest was already getting calls. From my former colleagues at the supermarket, from neighbors, even from Dwayne's old high school friends. Everyone wanted to express sympathy, support, and some just to satisfy curiosity. Barbara, the receptionist, was messaging me and switching calls with obvious distaste. "Mrs. Hatcher is not happy," Nurse Rita whispered to me. "She says you're causing problems for the facility." "What kind of trouble?" I was surprised. All I did was tell the truth. "Not everyone wants to hear the truth," Rita shrugged, "especially if it ruins their reputation." Martha King, my best friend since high school, called after lunch. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd moved to Cheyenne to live with her daughter after her husband died. "Berta, honey, I read an article on the internet," she exclaimed. "I can't believe Dwayne did that. I remember him as a boy. He was so polite, so caring." "Life happens, Martha," I replied. "People change, and usually not for the better. But leaving your own mother? Obviously, I've become a burden to him," I said, my voice calmer than I'd expected. "It's more convenient to dump me here than to take care of me." By late afternoon, the news seemed to have traveled all over town. One of the nurses told me that the local bar was all but talking about the article, and her mother's church group was collecting signatures on a petition for better treatment of the elderly. Nora, watching what was happening, shook her head. "You've launched something more than just a personal vendetta," she said over dinner. "People had been whispering about it for a long time, but no one had said it out loud." "Maybe it was time to do it," I replied. The next morning, Saturday, I was sitting in the common room with a cup of tasteless coffee when I saw Dwayne enter the lobby at a brisk pace. His face was red with anger, and he was saying something sharply to the receptionist, waving a newspaper. I straightened in my chair, preparing for a confrontation. Dwayne stormed into the common room, ignoring Barbara's pleas to calm down. "Mom!" His voice was full of rage. "What have you done?" Several of the occupants turned their heads in our direction with interest. "Ah," I put the cup down. "You remember the way here after all. I thought you'd forgotten where you left your mother. You made me look like some kind of monster to the whole town." He threw the paper on the table in front of me. "I get calls from people I've known my whole life telling me what a horrible son I am. Shelby had to take the day off. She can't show up at the bank. Everyone's staring at her. Kids come home from school in tears because their classmates tease them. And do you have any idea what's been happening to me for the past week?" I got up, leaning on my cane. "When I called you every day and you didn't answer, when I didn't know what was happening to my house, to my things, when I sat here, abandoned by my own son." Dwayne ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he'd done since childhood when he was upset. "Let's talk in your room," he said more quietly. "Not in front of everyone." "I don't have anything to hide," I said, but I headed for the exit. "Come on." Nora wasn't in her room. She'd left for her morning physical therapy. I sat down on the bed. Dwayne remained standing, pacing nervously between the bed and the window. "Why did you do that?" he asked. "Why did you go to the newspaper?" "Because you gave me no choice." I looked him straight in the eye. "You brought me here, promising me it was temporary, and then you disappeared. What was I supposed to think?" "I didn't disappear. I had problems, Mom. Serious problems that I was trying to deal with. What kind of problems could stop you from calling your own mother? Dwayne stopped and took a deep breath, as if gathering his wits. I lost my job, he said at last. Peterson's closing down the auto shop. Said he couldn't compete with the new chain. I've been looking for another job, interviewing in Casper and Sheridan. That's why I haven't been answering, traveling all over the state. You could have just told me that. And add to your worries? He shook his head. I wanted to work it out for myself and then tell you. What about my house? I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. Are you selling it? Dwayne looked away, and that was a clearer answer than any words could give. We need the money, Mom. The bank is threatening to foreclose on our house. I'm 3 payments behind on my mortgage. Shelby's hours at the bank have been cut. And then there's your staying here. You know how much that costs? Your insurance isn't enough. So that's what this is about. I felt a chill go through me. It's not the repairs. You're just getting rid of me because I'm too expensive. No, he exclaimed. It's not that simple. We were actually going to do some renovations so you could move in with us, widen the bathroom, install handrails. But then I lost my job, and all those plans fell through. We're barely making ends meet. I can't keep 2 houses. So you decided it would be easier to sell my house and keep me here. I had no choice, Mom. I could hear the desperation in his voice. What was I supposed to do? Let the bank take our house? Throw the kids out on the street? You could have told me the truth. I looked at him bitterly. Not lie about the renovations and the temporary stay. Just say, Mom, we're in trouble. We need to sell your house. I'd understand. Dwayne sank into the chair next to the bed, wrapping his arms around his head. I know, I chickened out. I thought it would be easier, for you and for me. We didn't talk. It was raining outside the window, the drops dripping down the glass, blurring the landscape, the gray parking lot, and the stunted trees behind it. Had you sold the house yet? I asked finally. No, he shook his head. But there's a buyer, a young couple. They're offering a good price. The papers are scheduled to be signed next week. And then what? What happens to me? Dwayne looked up, his eyes a mixture of guilt and determination. You'll stay here, Mom. Some of the money from the sale of the house will go to pay for your stay. They'll take better care of you here than I could. So the decision has already been made. I nodded, feeling a strange numbness inside. Without me. I didn't know how to tell you. He lowered his head. And now you've made me look like some kind of monster in front of the whole town. Isn't that right? I asked quietly. Isn't it monstrous to decide a man's fate behind his back? To sell his house? To take over his life as if he were out of his mind? I was trying to protect you. No, Dwayne, you were trying to protect yourself from having a difficult conversation, from having to look me in the eye and tell me the truth, from feeling guilty. He got up, started pacing the room again. So now what? You want me to cancel the sale? That we lose our house? I want you to be honest with me, I replied. Just for now. Tell me straight up. You're selling my house to save yours, and you're leaving me here forever. Dwayne stopped, turned to me. In his eyes, I could see the weariness and fear of a man who was about to lose everything. Yes, he said quietly. That's right. Strangely, that admission brought relief. The truth at last, unadorned and unvarnished. Thank you for your honesty, I nodded. Too bad it took a newspaper article. I'd had a few sleepless nights since Dwayne's visit. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, tired with shadows under his eyes, with that new crease between his eyebrows that I'd never noticed before. And I heard his voice. You're staying here, Mom. Not a question, not a request, a decision made without me. But what surprised me most was that after the initial outburst of anger and sense of betrayal, I felt strangely relieved. No longer did I have to wait for him to be about to come and take me home. No longer did I have to pretend to believe in the fairy tale of a temporary stay. The truth, even a bitter one, is always better than a sweet lie. My story in the paper got an unexpected response. On Tuesday, Harold brought in a stack of letters that had arrived at the Pine Rest address in my name. "Looks like you've become a celebrity, Mrs. Craig," he said, placing the envelopes on the table. "I don't remember such a thing." I've been sorting through the letters all day. Most were from older people in similar situations. A woman from Sheridan wrote that her daughter sold her house while she was in the hospital after a stroke. A man from Buffalo told how his son made him sign a deed of gift on a farm and then sent him to a veteran's home. The stories varied, but the essence was the same. Old people abandoned by their children, betrayed by those they raised. Some of the letters were anonymous, from people who didn't dare to openly speak out against their children, but wanted to share their pain. "Thank you for saying out loud what we all keep silent about," wrote a woman who signed simply, "Another abandoned mother." There were other letters from volunteers, social workers, nurses from nursing homes. They thanked me for drawing attention to the problem, for making people talk about what is usually kept quiet. "Who would have thought the old woman in room 215 would make such a fuss?" Nora said, watching me go through the envelopes. "I didn't want to make a fuss," I replied, putting the next letter aside. "I wanted justice." "And did you get it?" I wondered. Had I gotten what I wanted? The town had learned the truth. Dwayne had admitted his deception, but that didn't make it any easier. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but at least now I don't feel invisible." On Wednesday, as I sat in the lobby reading another letter, Jane, the receptionist on duty, came up to me with a tense face. "Mrs. Craig, you have visitors," she said, lowering her voice. "Your sister-in-law and her children. They're a little upset." I looked up and saw Shelby standing at the front desk. Next to her were Mason and Paige, my grandchildren. Shelby looked haggard, pale, with tightly compressed lips. The teenagers stood with their heads down, clearly not wanting to be here. "Take them to my room," I said to Jane. "I'll be right there." I needed a few minutes to collect my thoughts. This was the first time I'd seen my grandchildren since the article. What could I say to them? How could I explain why I had put their father on display? When I entered the room, Shelby was sitting in a chair by the window, and the kids were shuffling awkwardly from foot to foot by the door, as if ready to run away at any moment. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's good to see you." Shelby looked at me with a coldness that made me want to throw on a shawl. "Why did you do it, Berta?" she asked without preamble. "Why did you go to the paper?" "Because Dwayne stopped returning my calls," I answered. "Because I had a right to know what was going on with my house." "And you couldn't just wait? Give us time to work things out? You had to make this show?" "How long was I supposed to wait? A week? A month? A year? Until my house was sold and I was written off?" Shelby shook her head. "You have no idea what you've done." Her voice shook. "I was fired, Berta. Yesterday. The bank doesn't want the name Craig associated with their institution. We have 4 employees who serve elderly customers, and management is afraid your story will scare them away." I felt the blood drain from my face. It had never occurred to me that an article could have such repercussions. "Yeah, didn't know," I said quietly. "Of course you didn't know," Shelby grinned bitterly. "You were only thinking about yourself, your resentment, your revenge. Did you think about us? The fact that we barely had enough money for the mortgage and now I was out of work?" I shifted my gaze to my grandchildren. Mason, 16, almost a man now, stood staring at the floor. Paige, 14, was hugging herself around her shoulders like she was freezing. "Mason?" Paige, I called out, is there anything you want to say to Grandma? Mason looked up, his eyes a mixture of hurt and anger. Why did you do that? He asked, almost echoing his mother. Everyone at school is talking about it. Jimmy Parker said my father was an asshole who left his mother, and Sarah doesn't want to go out with me anymore. Language, Mason. Shelby automatically reprimanded him, but without much enthusiasm. I didn't want you to get hurt, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. I wanted the truth. S- what truth? Paige spoke now, her eyes glistening with tears. That Dad's trying to save our house? That he's working 2 jobs to pay for you to stay here? That we're eating macaroni and cheese for the 3rd day in a row because we can't afford anything else? I didn't know what to say. Every word my granddaughter said hit the mark. I really wasn't thinking about them when I did the interview. I was only thinking about my pain, my sense of betrayal. I didn't know you were in such trouble, I said finally. Dwayne hadn't said anything. Did you ask? Shelby shook her head. All these years, Berta, have you asked about our problems? Or have you only talked about your own? Her words hit something deep inside. I remembered our Sunday lunches, how I complained about the neighbors, about my back pain, about the prices at the stores. Had I asked how they were doing? Did I really ask and not just out of politeness? We thought we could take you home when Dad got a full-time job, Paige continued. I even offered to move into the living room so you could live in my room. But now, she didn't finish, just shook her head. Now what? I asked. Now it's impossible, Shelby answered in her daughter's place. After what you did, after you made Dwayne look like a villain in front of the whole town, do you think he'll want you in the house now? We sat in a heavy silence. It was raining outside the window, the drops tapping against the glass, a monotonous, hypnotizing sound. I, I, I didn't mean for this to happen, I said finally. I thought Dwayne was just getting rid of me. Maybe you should have talked to him first. Shelby stood up, smoothing the creases in her skirt. Give him a chance to explain himself? I tried, I exclaimed. I called every day. He wouldn't answer. Because his phone was disconnected for non-payment, Shelby said dryly. He used mine, but he couldn't take it with him when he went on job interviews. Another blow. I didn't know. I didn't know their phone was disconnected because of debt. I didn't know Dwayne was working 2 jobs. I didn't know the grandkids ate macaroni and cheese. Yeah, sorry, the word seemed empty, insufficient. Sorry won't get me my job back. Shelby headed for the door. And it won't stop the bank if we don't make a payment this month. Maybe I could help, I offered. When they sell my house. Shelby stopped, looked at me bitterly. Now you want to help? After ruining everything? She shook her head. We can handle it. We always have. She turned to the children. Let's go. We should go. Mason nodded and headed for the door, but Paige lingered. She walked over to me, and I thought she was going to hug me goodbye, like she always did before. Instead, she just looked me in the eye and said, I don't recognize you, Grandma. You always said family was the most important thing. And now you've ruined ours. She turned and walked out after her mother and brother, leaving me alone in the silence of the room, broken only by the rain on the glass. I don't know how long it was before Nora returned. She came in, shaking the drops off her umbrella, and I knew right away that something was wrong. What is it? She asked, sitting down next to me. You look like you've seen a ghost. Shelby got fired, I said quietly. Because of my article. The bank had concerns. Nora nodded, as if she'd expected something like that. Did you think there would be no repercussions for publishing it? I thought there would only be repercussions for Dwayne, I answered honestly. That people would judge him, not his family. It's not that simple in a small town. Nora shook her head. Everyone knows everyone. If one family member becomes an outcast, the rest of the family suffers too. I told her about the visit, about what Shelby and the kids had said, about what I'd learned about their financial situation. With each word, I could feel the weight on my heart growing. I didn't know, I repeated. I didn't know they were in such trouble. Maybe because you didn't ask, Nora suggested. Dwayne should have told me. Would you have listened? Nora looked at me with a look of understanding that made me uncomfortable. Or would you just start giving advice, criticizing him, telling him what he was doing wrong? I wanted to object, but I couldn't. Nora was right. That's how I usually reacted to my son's problems, not with sympathy, but with criticism. Berta, Nora continued, I haven't known you that long, but I've noticed something. You always think you know best. You're always sure that your view of a situation is the only correct one, and that, puts people off. What do you mean? I asked, feeling my defenses rising inside. Remember how you reacted when Nurse Rita suggested you try group therapy? You said it was a waste of time and that you weren't going to turn your soul out in front of a bunch of old people. She was just trying to help. That's different, I started, but Nora didn't let me finish. What about Harold? He brings in the paper every Monday free of charge, just to keep us up to date. And you're always criticizing his choices, saying that the Cody Chronicle is junk mail and that real news can only be found in the New York Times. I was silent. Every word Nora said hit the mark. And even with me, she continued more softly, you often interrupt me when I talk about my niece, as if my problems were less important than yours. I hadn't noticed, I said quietly. I really hadn't noticed. That's the problem, Berta. You don't notice how others perceive you. You gave an interview, you made your son look like a traitor, and you didn't think about how it would affect his family, because in your version of reality, only your feelings matter. Her words were like a cold shower, unpleasant, but sobering. I remembered Paige's face when she said she didn't recognize me. Mason's eyes, full of shame and anger. The weariness on Shelby's face. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, feeling completely lost. I don't know, Nora answered honestly. Maybe start listening. Really listen to others, not just to yourself? That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Nora's words rattled around in my head, mingling with the accusations of Shelby and the kids. I'd always thought of myself as fair, straightforward, telling the truth to my face. What if all this time I'd just been selfish, thinking only of my own feelings? The next morning, Harold brought a new stack of letters. Now there were others among them, from people condemning me for publicly humiliating my son. You don't know the whole situation, wrote a woman who identified herself as a Craig family friend. Dwayne is a good man who is in a tough spot. Until a week ago, I would have brushed off these letters, thinking their authors were fools who didn't understand my pain. But now, after talking to Shelby and the kids, after Nora's words, I read them with a new sense of self-doubt. Maybe I was really only seeing part of the picture, the part that concerned me. Maybe Dwayne had his own reasons for doing this, and not that. And maybe, the scariest thought of all, it was partly my own fault for ending up at Pine Rest. After all, if I had been a different mother, less critical, more understanding, maybe Dwayne would have found the strength to tell me the truth. Maybe together we could come up with a solution that wouldn't destroy our family. That evening, I tried to call Dwayne's house. No one answered the phone. I pictured them sitting around the table, probably still with macaroni and cheese, discussing how to get out of the financial hole life had put them in. And I, by my actions, had only made that hole deeper. For the first time in a long time, I felt not righteous anger, not a desire for justice, but simple human regret. Regret for not seeing, not hearing, not understanding my own family. And now, perhaps, It was too late to make things right. 3 months passed like a blur. Spring turned to summer, and I still woke up in the morning with a second of confusion. Where was I? Why was the ceiling so low? Why does it smell like lavender freshener and not my old curtains? And then I remembered Pine Rest, room 215, my new home, perhaps my last. Over the months, interest in my story gradually waned. The letters stopped coming. The phone was silent. Frank Olson wrote another article about systemic problems of elder care in small towns, but mentioned me only in passing as one of many. My little burst of fame ended as abruptly as it began. It was a hot July in Cody. The air conditioners at Pine Rest were running on high, but still couldn't handle the sweltering heat. We residents moved around the building like sleepy flies, choosing cooler places. I mostly sat in the library on the first floor, a small room with shabby books and one large window facing east. Hardly anyone went in there in the afternoon. It was too hot. It was there, in mid-July, that Martha King, an old friend of mine, who had promised to come back in May but kept putting it off, found me. Berta! She burst into the library like a small hurricane, despite her 70 years. I'm sorry it took so long. My daughter couldn't get out to Cody. We hugged. Martha smelled of the same perfume she'd smelled 40 years ago. Sweet, floral. She'd always been true to her habits. You look good, I said, and it wasn't a lie. Martha, unlike me, had always taken care of herself, a neat haircut, a manicure, a beige suit that matched her tanned skin. You're lying and not blushing, she laughed. But thank you. And you? She looked me over from head to toe. Have you lost weight? I nodded. I'd lost my appetite after talking to Shelby and the kids, and it hadn't come back. Eating had become a necessity, not a pleasure. We settled into chairs by the window, and Martha began to talk about her life in Cheyenne, her grandchildren, her volunteer work at the local library. I listened, half listening, thinking about how far our paths had diverged. We were both widowed, both old, but Martha seemed to have found her place in her new life, and I was still floundering, not sure where the current would take me. How are yours? She finally asked. Dwayne, Shelby, the kids? Did you make up with them after? She hesitated, not knowing what to call the newspaper story. After my little rebellion? I grinned wryly. No. Dwayne had called twice in those months, dryly, formally, as if he were doing his duty, asking if I had everything, if I needed anything, like he was talking to a distant relative, not my mother. And the children? They never came. I looked out the window, where cars glistened in the sunshine in the parking lot. No phone calls. I think Shelby told me not to. Is she still mad? Wouldn't you be mad? I turned to Martha. I basically destroyed her family. She lost her job because of my article. They almost lost their house. But they didn't, did they? No, I shook my head. Dwayne got a job at an auto body shop in Powell. He drives there every day, which is almost an hour each way. Shelby got a job as a cashier at a supermarket with a demotion and half the pay of the bank. They're making it work. How do you know? Martha wondered. If they don't talk to you? Nora, I nodded at the library door next door, where I could see my roommate dozing in a chair. Her niece is friends with Shelby's co-worker at the bank. Small town, everyone knows everything. Martha looked at me for a long moment, then asked quietly, Do you regret what you did? I wondered. Do I regret it? It was a question I had asked myself every day for the past 3 months. Yes and no, I answered honestly. I regret hurting my grandchildren. It wasn't their fault. I regret Shelby losing her job. But I don't regret making Dwayne tell the truth. I'm not sorry I stopped living in ignorance and false hope. What about your house? Martha asked. Did you sell it? In May, I nodded. To a young couple with a baby. Dwayne said part of the money would pay for me to stay here, the rest for their mortgage. I didn't argue. And you just accepted it? Martha sounded surprised. The Bertha Craig I knew would have fought to the bitter end. Maybe I got tired of fighting, I shrugged, or realized that some battles aren't worth losing. We talked some more about old friends, about city news, about books we'd recently read, but something changed. It was as if an invisible wall had come between us. Martha remained there in the world of active people, and I had already passed into a different category, those who lived to see the end of life. After she left, I sat at the window for a long time, looking out at the parking lot where her daughter was waiting in the car. Martha waved to me before getting into the car. I waved back, thinking about the fact that I would probably never see her again. Our lives had drifted too far apart. Your friend seems nice, Nora said, waking up and walking over to me. How long have you two known each other? Since high school, I answered. Over 60 years. Do you see each other often? The last time we saw each other was at my husband's funeral, 10 years ago. Nora nodded understandingly. She didn't say platitudes like, it's a shame, or we should keep in touch. Nora rarely said platitudes at all, one of the reasons she and I had grown closer over the months. In August, Dwayne called to say they were moving to Powell. They'd found a smaller, cheaper house closer to his work. It'll be more convenient, he said. We won't have to spend so much on gas. Sure, I said. It makes sense. We talked for a while. I could hear muffled voices through the phone, Shelby, and the kids were probably packing. How were Mason and Paige? I asked, feeling my heart clench. Are they okay? They're fine, Dwayne answered after a pause. Mason's got a part-time job at the supermarket helping us with money. Paige is taking care of the younger kids, babysitting while her parents are at work. Doesn't make a lot of money, but she helps out. Tell them I miss them, I said quietly. I paused again. I will, he said finally, and I realized he was lying. Wouldn't tell them anything. Dwayne, I pulled myself together. I want to apologize for the article, for everything that happened afterward. I didn't know about your problems. I didn't realize what you were going through. You didn't ask. His voice sounded tired without anger. I know, and I apologize for that too. He sighed. Mom, none of this matters anymore. What's done is done. We're doing fine. So are you, by the looks of it. Let's just leave it at that. I wanted to object, to say that we shouldn't be so far apart, that we could still fix things. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew he was right. We all moved on in different directions. After the call, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the yellowed photograph I still kept on my nightstand of Henry and me on our 30th wedding anniversary. Both of us smiling, happy, unaware that in just 5 years he would be gone, and in another 10 I would be here, alone. What would you do, Henry? I asked the photograph. How would you make things right? But Henry was silent, and I couldn't imagine what he would say. In 10 years without him, I had begun to forget his voice, his mannerisms, his way of thinking. All that remained were fragmented memories, like images from an old movie I'd seen long ago. In September, I was moved to a single room, a space that had been vacated when Mrs. Wilson of the 210th quietly passed away in her sleep. Nora helped me pack my things, and we both tried not to think about the fact that rooms in this house were usually vacated only in this way. The new room was slightly larger, with a private bath and a window facing east instead of the parking lot. In the mornings, the sun peeked right over my bed, and I woke up earlier than before. Are you going to miss me? Nora asked as I was organizing my things in my new closet. Of course, I answered sincerely, You're the only person here I can talk to without feeling like falling asleep from boredom. Nora laughed. Come to visit. I always enjoy company, especially yours. She turned to go to the door, but I stopped her. Nora, I said, thank you for being there for me all these months, for telling me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. She stared at me for a few seconds, then nodded. Sometimes we all need someone to tell the truth, she replied simply and walked out. I slowly settled into the new room, giving it a little more personality hanging my curtains. Barbara allowed it after much persuasion, putting a couple of books on the windowsill, pinning pictures to the wall, not just the one of Henry, but some new ones that Martha had sent me after her visit. Old snapshots from our youth, from picnics and school parties, a reminder that I had once been young, full of hope and plans. In late September, Paige called out of the blue. I was just getting ready for lunch when Jane knocked on the door. Mrs. Craig, your granddaughter's on the line. Would you come in? I ran to the phone as fast as my sore hip would allow. Paige? My voice was shaking with excitement. Hi, Grandma, she said softly, as if she was afraid to be overheard. How are you? Good, I answered, swallowing the lump in my throat. How are you? How are you doing in Powell? It's okay. It's a new school, but I've already made friends. Dad's less tired, work is closer. We talked about nothing about her new classes, about Mason starting to date a girl, about the cat they picked up on the street. Not a word about the past, about the article, about my betrayal as they perceived it. It's like we just haven't seen each other in a while. Dad and Mom don't know I'm calling, she said at the end of the conversation. You better not tell them. I won't, I promised. But why did you decide to call now? Paige paused for a moment, then said, I miss you, Grandma. E. I know you didn't mean to hurt us. You were just hurt and scared. I covered my eyes, feeling a tear roll down my cheek. Thank you, sweetheart. It means a lot to me. I'll try to call sometimes, she said. But don't tell your parents, okay? I promise, I said. After that call, something changed. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying around in my chest all these months had gotten a little lighter. Not completely gone, but lessened enough that I could breathe more freely. Autumn in Cody was beautiful gold and red leaves on the trees, clear blue skies, cool air. I went out more often to the Pine Rest Garden, a small area with a few benches and old maples. I would sit there for hours, watching the falling leaves, the birds preparing to migrate, the other inhabitants who, like me, were looking for peace in the fresh air. One day in October, as I sat on my usual bench, Mrs. Hatcher approached me. She looked preoccupied. Mrs. Craig, she began, taking a seat beside me, I wanted to talk to you about the financial side of your being here. I tensed. The money from the sale of the house was supposed to cover my expenses for several years. Is something wrong? Not really, she faltered. The thing is, we haven't received any payment from your son for the past 2 months. I've tried to contact him, but to no avail. The phone was disconnected. I felt a chill go down my spine. What happened to Dwayne? Why isn't he paying? Has their financial situation gotten that bad? I don't know what's going on, I answered honestly. We haven't spoken in weeks. Mrs. Hatcher nodded. I understand, but we need to address this problem. Do you have savings? Maybe other relatives who might be able to help? I shook my head. Everything I had gone into the house, which was now sold. I could call Dwayne, I suggested. Find out what happened. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Hatcher replied. We have a reserve fund for such situations, but it's not infinite. If the problem is not resolved soon, we will have to discuss options for transfer to a state institution. She walked away, leaving me confused. A state institution. I'd heard of them. Overcrowded, minimal care, no amenities, which was what Pine Rest was. a place where they send those who have no one to take care of them. That evening, I called Dwayne. The number really wasn't working. I tried calling his car service in Powell. They said he quit 2 weeks ago. No one knew where he'd gone. Confused, I went back to my room. What had happened to my son? Why had he disappeared without a word? And what would happen to me now? I sat at the window for a long time, looking out at the fading day. Strangely, instead of panic, I felt a kind of detached calm. It was as if everything that had happened in the last 6 months had prepared me for this moment when I was truly alone. After all, wasn't this what it was all about? Dwayne got rid of me when I became a liability, sold my house, took the money, and disappeared. The story's as old as time. I just didn't want to see the signs. I remembered Nora's words from months ago. You've set something more than just personal revenge in motion. And it was true. My article, my little rebellion, they hadn't brought me what I wanted. They didn't bring my son back. They didn't bring justice. But they did give me something else. A voice, the right to be heard, the right to have the last word. And maybe that's what I really wanted. Not to go home, not to live with a family who saw me as nothing but a burden, but just to be heard, to have a right to my story, to my truth, even if no one wanted it. I didn't know the answers to these questions. All I knew was that whatever the future held, in Pine Rest or in a state institution, with or without a family, I would live it in my own way, as I had lived my whole life, stubbornly, proudly, on my own terms. When it got dark, I pulled out of my nightstand an old notebook where I kept important phone numbers. I found Frank Olson's number. Maybe it was time for another article. Stories not just about the abandoned mother, but about what happens afterward, when the noise dies down, the cameras leave, and you're left alone with the consequences of your little rebellion. Stories about how sometimes you have to lose everything else to be heard.